At my grandfather's while reading, my entire family actually popped champagne. They thought they had just inherited a $1 billion logistics empire. My parents and my sister walked away with 50% of the voting shares and $100 million in cash. I was handed a single yellowed envelope. My sister laughed and told me it was probably an application for food stamps. But when I locked myself in the bathroom and dialed the only phone number written inside that envelope, a cold voice answered. I have been waiting for your call, Heir. My name is Stella and I am 33 years old. I work as a financial auditor in Seattle. For my entire life, my family treated me like a disappointment because I chose a regular salary over playing court jester in their corporate circus. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of your family, only to prove them all wrong. The reading took place in a sprawling mahogany-paneled boardroom of a top-tier downtown law firm. The air inside the room was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and barely suppressed greed. Theodore Harrison was a self-made logistics billionaire, a ruthless corporate titan who had built his massive empire from a single cargo truck. He was also the only person in my family who ever saw me for who I really was. As the estate executor finished reading the primary asset distribution, the room erupted into hushed, ecstatic gasps. My parents, Richard and Patricia, inherited 50% of the voting shares in Harrison Logistics and a staggering $100 million in liquid cash. My younger sister, Natalie, received the family Hamptons estate and a $20 million trust fund. Then the executor turned to me. I was the designated black sheep of the Harrison family. I was handed a single yellowed envelope. No stocks, no real estate, no cash. Natalie scoffed, leaning back in her plush leather chair. At 28, she had perfected the art of looking perpetually bored and incredibly expensive. She adjusted her diamond bracelet and smirked. Must be the phone number for some homeless shelter for you to move into, she laughed loudly. Her husband Jamal chuckled along with her. Jamal was a 32-year-old African-American venture capitalist, or at least that was the impressive title he slapped on all his online profiles. In reality, his ventures consisted entirely of burning through my sister's allowances on crypto scams and phantom tech startups. He liked to play the sophisticated intellect wearing bespoke Italian suits and treating me like I was part of the hired help. Jamal reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and flicked it across the massive conference table. It fluttered through the air and landed right on top of my yellow envelope. Take a rideshare home. Stella? Jamal said, his voice dripping with fake pity. Your beat-up car is ruining the aesthetic of the millionaire's parking lot downstairs. My mother, Patricia, did not even reprimand him for the insult. She just smoothed her designer skirt and cast a cold glance my way. Your grandfather finally woke up and realized you were a lost cause, she sneered. 33, unmarried, auditing other people's money because you were too arrogant to work for the family business. You always thought you were better than us. Look where that independence got you. My father, Richard, nodded in agreement, looking like a man who had spent his entire life waiting for a crown he did not earn. It is a relief, really, he added. Now we do not have to pretend you are part of the new Harrison legacy. We can finally cut the dead weight and focus on taking this company to the next level. I did not cry. I did not yell. I simply picked up the envelope, ignored the $100 bill, and stood up from the table. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, a mix of triumph and vicious satisfaction as I walked out of the boardroom. The moment the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind me, the calm facade I was maintaining cracked, but only for a second. I walked briskly down the long carpeted corridor and slipped into the nearest private executive restroom. I locked the door behind me, leaned against the cold marble sink, and ripped open the yellowed envelope. There was no letter of apology inside. There was no sentimental goodbye note from him. There was only a blank index card with a phone number written in my grandfather's unmistakable sharp handwriting. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number. It rang exactly once before someone picked up the line. "I have been waiting for this call, Heir," a cold, precise voice answered. "Who is this?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "My name is Caldwell. I was your grandfather's shadow counsel." "The lawyer they do not know about," the voice replied calmly. "Your current checking account balance is exactly $6,412. Your family thinks they have just inherited the world, but Theodore Harrison did not suffer fools, and he certainly did not finance them. He knew exactly how they would react today." "What did they inherit?" I asked my auditors, brain immediately calculating the legal implications of his words. "The illusion of power," Caldwell said smoothly. He paused for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation fully settle over me before giving his final instructions. "Tonight at 8 o'clock sharp, meet me at the old industrial port building at Pier 44. We have a lot of work to do and very little time to do it. Make absolutely sure you are not followed by anyone." The line went dead, leaving me standing alone in total silence. I stared at the blank screen of my phone, letting the silence of the executive restroom wash over me. The illusion of power, the phrase repeated in my head. As an auditor, my career was built on dismantling illusions. I spent my days tearing apart forged ledgers, exposing hidden debts, and proving numbers never lied. $100 million and a 50% voting stake constituted a massive reality, not a mirage. Yet Theodore Harrison played corporate chess while everyone else played checkers. He never rewarded incompetence. I turned on the brass faucet, splashing cold water on my wrists. Whatever game my grandfather had set up, I was now the primary player. I smoothed the lapels of my dark suit, lifted my chin, and unlocked the heavy door. I was no longer the discarded black sheep. I was an auditor on the verge of uncovering the biggest discrepancy of my life. As I rounded the corner toward the main reception area, the sheer volume of my family's arrogance hit me. Natalie and Jamal were standing near the windows posing for selfies. Natalie was holding up her distribution documents like a championship trophy, making sure the embossed seal was perfectly visible for her social media followers. She threw her head back, laughing at something Jamal said. Jamal had one arm wrapped possessively around her waist while scrolling through his phone, probably already looking up private jets to squander her newly acquired trust fund on. I tried to walk past them quietly, heading straight for the elevators, but my father spotted me. Richard Harrison handed his coat to a nervous-looking legal assistant and swaggered directly into my path. He looked like a man who had spent his entire adult life desperately waiting for a crown he had never earned. Now he was practically vibrating with unearned authority. "Stella," he said, his voice booming across the quiet lobby to ensure everyone around us heard him. "Since we are restructuring our assets and stepping into our new roles, there is a matter of housekeeping we need to address immediately." "Housekeeping?" I asked, keeping my tone completely neutral. My father smiled, a cruel, predatory expression that did not reach his eyes. "I just instructed my personal wealth manager to buy out the residential complex where you currently rent your apartment," he announced proudly. "I do not want a low-level auditor dragging down the prestige of our family real estate portfolio. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." He had not just kicked me out. He had actively gone out of his way to purchase a building in downtown Seattle solely for the purpose of evicting his own daughter. The sheer vindictiveness of the act was staggering, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. "You bought an entire apartment building just to terminate my lease?" I asked, my voice steady. Jamal strolled up behind my father, slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. "It is called gentrification, Stella," Jamal said, adjusting his cuffs with a condescending smirk. "We are upgrading the tenant profile. You simply do not fit the new tax bracket anymore. But do not worry, you can use that $100 bill I gave you upstairs to rent a moving truck. You better pack fast." My mother, Patricia, joined them, linking her arm through my father's. She looked me up and down with absolute disdain. "We cannot have the media finding out the new CEO has a daughter living like a commoner," she added sharply. "We are protecting the brand." 24 hours, Stella. If your belongings are not out by noon tomorrow, your father will toss them onto the sidewalk. I looked at the four of them standing there like a pack of wolves. They were drunk on new money, intoxicated by a wealth they had not worked a single day to build. They thought they held all the cards. They thought they had broken me. Understood, I said quietly. I did not argue. I did not beg for extra time. I simply turned on my heel and pressed the button for the elevator. By the time I reached the ground floor, the sky had darkened and a heavy Seattle rain had started to pour. I stepped out of the glass lobby and onto the slick pavement, pulling my collar up against the chill. I did not walk toward the parking garage. I stood at the edge of the curb, letting the cold rain wash over me. Exactly 2 minutes later, a sleek black armored sedan glided silently through the storm and came to a halt right in front of me. The door swung open smoothly. Sitting inside the luxurious cabin was a man in his early 60s wearing an immaculate three-piece suit. He possessed an aura of absolute authority, looking like a vault that held dangerous corporate secrets. Miss Harrison? Mr. Caldwell said, his voice the same crisp tone I heard on the phone. He gestured toward the empty leather seat beside him. Please get in. It is time you received your actual inheritance. I slid into the plush interior of the sedan, and the heavy door pulled shut, sealing us away from the storm. The car accelerated smoothly, merging into the city traffic. I looked at the man sitting next to me. You told me to meet you at 8 tonight, I noted, keeping my gaze fixed on him. I did, Caldwell replied, pulling a silver tablet from his briefcase. But I also watched your father purchase your apartment building via a rapid wire transfer 10 minutes ago. Theodore anticipated they would try to sever your resources immediately to assert dominance. He authorized me to intervene the moment they initiated hostile actions against you personally. So what happens now, I asked. Caldwell smiled, a thin curve of his lips. We go to the port. Your grandfather left them a loaded gun, but he gave you the detonator to control the explosion. The armored sedan maneuvered through the rain-slicked streets of downtown Seattle, leaving the towering glass skyscrapers behind. I stared at the partition separating us from the driver, my mind processing Caldwell's final sentence. A detonator. My grandfather had always communicated in the language of leverage and risk assessment. He built a logistics empire by understanding exactly what people wanted and exactly how to withhold it until the terms favored him. Now he was applying that same brutal corporate philosophy to his own flesh and blood. Before we reach the port, we need to handle a logistical vulnerability, I stated, breaking the silence. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. My father gave me 24 hours to vacate my apartment, but Richard Harrison has never respected a deadline in his life. He thrives on the spectacle of humiliation. He will likely send a crew to drag my belongings onto the sidewalk before midnight just to ensure my neighbors witness my eviction. I refused to give him the satisfaction of a public spectacle. I opened a browser and quickly searched for an elite emergency relocation service. I found a company specializing in rapid corporate transfers and initiated a call. A representative answered immediately. I need a full pack and sweep of a one-bedroom apartment, I told the agent, keeping my voice clipped and professional. I need your crew at the location within the hour. Pack everything, box it, and transport it to a climate-controlled storage facility under a corporate alias. I am paying triple your standard rate for absolute discretion and speed. I want the unit completely empty before the property managers even realize a truck has arrived. I provided my credit card information, the same account my family had just mocked to secure the transaction. When I ended the call, I found Caldwell watching me with a look of quiet approval. He adjusted his pristine cuffs. Your grandfather always admired your clinical detachment, Stella. Natalie would have thrown a tantrum. Jamal would have posted a long rant on social media. You simply neutralized the threat, identified the required capital, and executed a countermeasure. That is exactly why you are sitting in this car, and they are not. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows in the heavy rain. I leaned back against the leather seat, allowing myself a brief moment to absorb the surreal nature of the afternoon. Less than an hour ago, I was a mid-level financial auditor, bracing for the emotional fallout of a family betrayal. Now I was sitting in a bulletproof vehicle, orchestrating a rapid extraction from my own life, and preparing to receive a hidden legacy. "Who exactly are you, Mr. Caldwell?" I asked, turning to face him. "You claim to be his shadow counsel, but Theodore Harrison retained the most aggressive corporate law firm on the West Coast. The partners at that firm just handed my family $100 million and 50% voting rights in Harrison Logistics. They seemed absolutely convinced that they had executed my grandfather's final wishes to the letter. How could a billionaire hide an entirely separate legal entity from his primary legal team?" Caldwell took a silver flask from a hidden compartment in the door and poured a small measure of amber liquid into a crystal tumbler. He offered it to me, but I shook my head. He took a slow sip before answering. "Theodore Harrison did not trust anyone who smiled too much or charged by the hour," Caldwell explained, his voice smooth and deliberate. "The firm you saw today handles the public face of the empire. They manage the lawsuits, the labor disputes, the acquisitions, and the public relations. They are expensive guard dogs. I, on the other hand, am the architect of the vault. I do not exist on any public payroll. My retainer is paid through a series of offshore blind trusts. I handle the assets your grandfather wanted, completely shielded from public record and, more importantly, from your parents." The sedan exited the highway and began navigating the desolate industrial roads of the Seattle waterfront. The towering cranes of the shipping yards loomed in the distance, cutting sharp silhouettes against the dark storm clouds. The smell of salt water and diesel fuel seeped through the vents. "Your family has spent the last decade complaining about your choice of profession," Caldwell continued, looking out the rain-battered window. "They mocked you for auditing spreadsheets instead of attending charity galas. They called your job menial. But Theodore knew that to truly control an empire, you must first understand how to read its lifeblood. You must understand where every single cent flows, how it is categorized, and how it can be weaponized. He needed an heir who understood the anatomy of a financial statement, not someone who only knew how to spend the dividends." The car slowed as we approached Pier 44. It was a bleak, neglected section of the port. Rows of rusting shipping containers formed a labyrinth of rusted metal and broken asphalt. At the very end of the pier stood a massive windowless concrete structure. It looked like a forgotten relic from the Cold War, a brutalist bunker designed to withstand a siege. There were no corporate logos, no signs indicating ownership, just a single reinforced steel door and a heavy-duty security camera mounted high on the concrete wall. The sedan pulled up to the curb and stopped. The driver stepped out into the pouring rain and opened my door, holding a large black umbrella to shield me from the downpour. I stepped out onto the wet pavement, the cold wind whipping my hair across my face. Caldwell exited from the other side and joined me on the curb. "It does not look like the headquarters of a billion-dollar legacy," I noted, keeping my eyes on the imposing steel door. "My parents just inherited a glass skyscraper downtown. This looks like a place where things go to disappear." Caldwell smiled, stepping past me toward the entrance. "A glass skyscraper is built to show the world how much money you have, Stella. A bunker is built to protect the machinery that actually generates that money. Your family is busy measuring the drapes in the executive suites. They are completely unaware that they do not even own the foundation of the building they are standing in." He approached the security panel next to the door. Instead of a standard keypad, it featured a retinal scanner and a biometric hand reader. Caldwell placed his right hand flat against the glowing glass panel and leaned forward. A narrow beam of green light swept across his eye. The machine beeped a sharp metallic sound, and the massive steel doors unlocked with a deep mechanical groan, sliding open to reveal a brightly lit interior. "Step inside," Heir Caldwell said, gesturing toward the glowing corridor. "Let me introduce you to the real Harrison Empire." I crossed the threshold into the brutalist bunker, and the heavy steel doors sealed shut behind us with a loud locking mechanism. The interior was a stark contrast to the decaying concrete shell outside. We stood in a pristine, brightly lit corridor lined with reinforced glass walls. Beyond the glass rows of humming server racks stretched out like a high-tech fortress. It was a data center operating completely off the grid. Caldwell led me down the hall, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the polished epoxy floor. We entered a spacious command center at the end of the corridor. There were no decorative paintings or plush leather sofas here. Instead, massive digital displays covered the walls, projecting live feeds of global shipping routes, supply chain metrics, and dense financial charts. In the center of the room sat a sleek metal conference table covered in thick legal binders. "Take a seat," Stella Caldwell instructed, walking over to a secure terminal and typing in a rapid command. I sat down at the table, my eyes darting across the screens. As an auditor, I immediately recognized the data structures. These were the internal operating metrics for Harrison Logistics. I was looking at the raw, unfiltered lifeblood of my grandfather's empire. Caldwell pressed a final button, and the largest screen on the wall shifted. A complex, sprawling corporate organization chart appeared. At the bottom was Harrison Logistics, the company my parents and sister had just inherited. But above it, connected by a series of solid red lines, was a separate entity I had never seen before. It was simply labeled Harrison Holdings Management. "Your family inherited 50% of Harrison Logistics," Caldwell said, taking a seat across from me. "They inherited the physical trucks, the warehouse employees, the payroll obligations, and the massive public liabilities. What they do not know is that 3 years ago, your grandfather executed a ruthless corporate restructuring maneuver. He performed an intellectual property spin-off." I stared at the chart, my eyes tracing the red lines connecting the two entities. My breath caught in my throat as the financial reality of the diagram clicked into place. He stripped the operating company. Precisely, Caldwell smiled, a razor-thin curve of his lips, revealing his predatory legal mind. He created this master holding company in total secrecy. This holding company owns 100% of the proprietary routing algorithms, the logistics software patents, the commercial real estate leases for every single warehouse, and the licensing rights to the Harrison brand name itself. Harrison Logistics is just an operating shell, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. They do not own the technology, they do not own the land, they do not even own the name printed on the side of their trucks. They are just renting it all. "They are renting it from you," Stella Caldwell said. He reached across the table and slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio toward me. "You are the sole heir and the 100% shareholder of the master holding company. Harrison Logistics pays your holding company a massive licensing fee every single quarter just to keep their lights on. If the holding company revokes those licenses, Harrison Logistics ceases to exist within 48 hours. Their trucks stop running, their software crashes, their warehouses lock them out." I opened the portfolio. The legal language was bulletproof. My grandfather had handed them a loaded gun, and he had given me the detonator. The sheer genius of the trap left me momentarily speechless. Why did he not just leave the operating company to me as well? I asked, looking up from the documents. Why go through this elaborate charade to give them half the company and a mountain of cash? "Because he knew they would try to destroy you for it," Caldwell replied, his tone dead serious. "He wanted to see exactly what they would do with absolute power. The $100 million in cash he left them today was a test, a fiduciary stress test. If they invest it back into the operating company and act responsibly, they survive. But your grandfather knew Richard and Patricia better than anyone. He knew they were greedy. He knew Natalie was careless. And he knew Jamal was an arrogant grifter who would immediately try to use the Harrison assets to fund his own phantom tech startups. So if they squander the cash," I started piecing the legal puzzle together. "If they violate their fiduciary duties or mismanage the operating shell, what happens? You have the absolute legal right to seize the operating company remaining assets to cover the licensing debts," Caldwell finished. "The master licensing agreement contains strict covenants. If they pledge Harrison Logistics assets as collateral for outside ventures, the holding company can trigger an immediate default. Your grandfather gave them enough rope to hang themselves." I looked down at the signature line on the final page of the trust transfer document. My family had spent my entire life telling me I was a failure because I chose to audit financial statements instead of posing for society magazines. They mocked my intelligence and evicted me from my home just hours ago to prove their dominance. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried me. "You are not just a financial auditor anymore," Stella Caldwell said, pulling a platinum pen from his jacket pocket and offering it to me. "You are the landlord of their entire empire. Sign the documents and take your throne." I took the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name in sharp, decisive strokes, legally claiming my position as the sole owner and chief executive officer of Harrison Holdings Management. The ink was barely dry when my cell phone buzzed sharply in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was an urgent automated email from the Human Resources Department at my auditing firm. The subject line glared at me in bold red letters. "Urgent, mandatory, all-hands meeting at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." Caldwell glanced at the glowing screen of my phone. "Ah," he murmured, a knowing glint in his eye. "It appears your brother-in-law Jamal has already begun spending his wife's trust fund. He is moving faster than even your grandfather predicted." I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. My family wanted to play ruthless corporate games. They wanted to see what happened when they pushed me into a corner. "Prepare the legal team." "Mr. Caldwell," I said, standing up from the conference table, "I have a mandatory meeting to attend tomorrow morning, and Jamal is going to learn exactly why you never bring a checkbook to a gunfight." At 8:45 the next morning, I walked through the revolving glass doors of the Midtown auditing firm where I had worked tirelessly for the past 6 years. I wore my sharpest charcoal-tailored suit, stepping into the building with a level of confidence I had never possessed before. I had not slept a single minute the previous night, but the pure adrenaline coursing through my veins and the absolute certainty of my new reality kept my mind functioning with razor-sharp precision. The atmosphere in the expansive glass lobby was thick with undeniable panic. Junior analysts clustered near the stainless steel water coolers, whispering frantically and checking their phones. Senior partners who normally strutted through the polished hallways with arrogant confidence now stood awkwardly by the main reception desk, looking visibly shaken and exceptionally pale. An emergency all-hands meeting at a prestigious financial auditing firm usually meant one of two devastating things: a catastrophic federal audit involving criminal charges or an aggressive hostile takeover. Given the automated email I received the previous night from Human Resources, I knew exactly which disaster was currently unfolding. I bypassed the panicked groups of my coworkers and took my seat in the main conference hall. The room was massive, purposefully designed to hold over 300 employees, and every single chair was already filled. The ambient noise of nervous chatter echoed loudly off the high acoustic ceilings. I sat in the fourth row, perfectly centered, maintaining a highly relaxed posture, while everyone around me fidgeted with their notebooks and pens. At exactly 9 o'clock, the heavy oak double doors at the back of the hall swung open with a loud, echoing thud. The entire room instantly fell into a dead, terrified silence. In walked my father Richard, my mother Patricia, my sister Natalie, and leading the pack like a conquering warlord was Jamal. He wore a custom emerald velvet suit jacket that easily cost more than a junior auditor's entire annual salary. He walked with an exaggerated, arrogant swagger, openly soaking in the fear of the hundreds of seasoned professionals watching him. Natalie clung tightly to his arm, wearing an inappropriately flashy sequined cocktail dress for a morning corporate meeting. She chewed gum loudly, casting disdainful, judging glances at the hard-working employees she passed. My parents flanked them, looking incredibly smug and self-important, as if they had personally conquered a sovereign nation through sheer military brilliance. They marched straight down the center aisle, completely ignoring the senior partners who tried to make eye contact. Jamal walked directly up to the main podium on the elevated stage, tapping the microphone twice with his diamond ring. The sharp electronic feedback squeal made several people in the front row wince and cover their ears. He leaned heavily into the microphone, his face splitting into a predatory, highly satisfied grin. "Good morning, employees," Jamal announced, his voice dripping with unearned authority and ridiculous condescension. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, my newly formed venture capital firm has successfully completed a hostile buyout of this entire auditing agency. I am officially your new Chief Executive Officer." A collective murmur of absolute shock rippled through the expansive room. I watched the seasoned senior partners exchange horrified, panicked looks. Jamal had literally used my sister's inherited trust fund to buy the very firm I worked for, solely to flex his newfound financial power over me. It was a staggering display of petty vindictiveness that bordered on pathological obsession. We are entering a bold new era of aggressive corporate synergy. Jamal continued wildly throwing around business buzzwords he clearly did not understand. The old, outdated ways of doing business here are dead. We are aggressively trimming the fat. We are completely restructuring the corporate hierarchy and permanently removing those who lack the social capital and visionary mindset required for the new Harrison legacy. He gripped the wooden edges of the podium, leaning forward aggressively. As your new CEO, my very first order of business is to clean house. We have serious dead weight in the financial auditing department right now. We have people who mistakenly think they are smarter than the executives paying their salaries, people who completely lack respect for the corporate hierarchy and family loyalty. He looked up slowly, scanning the crowded auditorium until his eyes locked directly onto mine. The entire room shifted following his gaze, turning in their seats to look back at me. Stella Harrison, Jamal said, his voice artificially amplified across the completely silent hall. Stand up right now. I did not flinch. I did not show a single ounce of fear, anxiety, or embarrassment. I stood up slowly, deliberately, smoothing the front of my blazer, and looked him dead in the eye with absolute freezing detachment. You are fired, Jamal shouted, grinning from ear to ear with malicious glee. You lack the dynamic, high-level social competencies required to operate in my new prestigious firm. Security is waiting by your desk with a cardboard box. You have exactly 10 minutes to clear out your cubicle before they physically escort you out of the building. Natalie giggled loudly from the front row, covering her mouth in a very poor attempt to hide her absolute delight. My mother, Patricia, looked at me with an expression of utter vindictive triumph. They truly believed they had utterly broken me. They thought that stripping away my successful career and evicting me from my downtown apartment all within 24 hours would force me to crawl back to them on my knees, begging for basic mercy. I need your signature on the official severance and non-compete agreements in my executive office immediately, Jamal ordered aggressively, pointing a manicured finger at me. I nodded calmly, without saying a word, and stepped out of my row. I walked down the long aisle, matching his arrogant, aggressive stare, with absolute complete silence, knowing the trap was set perfectly and flawlessly for him to fall right into today. The whispers of my former colleagues surrounded me like a swarm of angry bees as I made my way toward the front of the auditorium. Senior auditors, people who had mentored me, looked away in sheer embarrassment. They knew this was a targeted personal execution, masquerading as corporate restructuring. Jamal stood at the edge of the elevated stage, waiting for me with his arms crossed over his emerald velvet jacket. He looked like a child who had just been handed the keys to a bank vault, completely unaware of the heavy security mechanisms waiting to crush him inside. Natalie stepped directly into my path before I could reach the stairs. She held a glass of morning champagne she had likely demanded from the catering staff. Her sequined dress caught the harsh fluorescent lights, making her look ridiculously out of place in a room full of terrified financial professionals. I hope you brought a sturdy cardboard box, Stella, my sister, sneered, taking a slow sip of her drink. You have a lot of cheap desk plants and boring motivational mugs to pack up today. Do not worry, though, because Jamal is going to hire a real professional to take your cubicle. Someone with an actual degree from a respectable university, not a bitter spinster who audits expense reports for a living. I simply stepped around her without offering a single word of response. My absolute refusal to engage infuriated her. I could hear her sharp intake of breath as I passed, but I kept my eyes locked on Jamal. My mother, Patricia, sat in the front row, her designer handbag resting on her lap. She leaned forward as I walked by, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. This is what happens when you refuse to respect your family, Patricia said, her tone laced with venomous satisfaction. We tried to give you a dignified life, Stella, but you insisted on playing the independent working woman. Look at you now, fired publicly and homeless by tomorrow noon. You brought this entirely on yourself. My father Richard nodded in agreement, adjusting his expensive silk tie. You should have taken a low-level administrative job at Harrison Logistics when I offered it 5 years ago, he added loudly, ensuring the senior partners heard him. Now, you are leaving corporate America with a massive black mark on your professional resume. Good luck finding another firm willing to hire a disgraced auditor. I continued, walking past them, my face a mask of freezing detachment. Jamal gestured for me to follow him through the heavy side doors of the auditorium, leading the way toward the executive suites. Two security guards in dark suits fell into step right behind me. We marched through the polished glass corridors of the firm. The hallways were eerily empty as all employees were still confined to the mandatory meeting. Jamal strutted down the hallway like he owned the very air inside the building. He pointed at various abstract paintings hanging on the walls, dictating orders to a terrified assistant trailing behind us. "Take that ugly painting down," Jamal snapped, waving his hand dismissively. "Replace it with a portrait of me and Natalie, and order a new espresso machine for the executive lounge. I want beans imported directly from Italy. We need to elevate the brand immediately." I walked silently behind him, analyzing his erratic behavior. He was spending money he did not actually have on superficial aesthetic upgrades, while ignoring the core financial mechanics of the business he just purchased. We reached the end of the hallway, and Jamal pushed open the double glass doors to the primary corner executive office. It was the office formerly occupied by the managing partner, a man who had spent 30 years building this firm from the ground up. Jamal marched straight to the massive mahogany desk and dropped into the high-backed leather executive chair. He kicked his expensive Italian loafers up onto the polished wood surface, crossing his ankles. Natalie followed closely behind, perching herself on the edge of the desk. My parents entered the office last, closing the glass doors to ensure we had complete privacy for my final humiliation. "Welcome to my new empire," Stella Jamal said, spreading his arms wide. "Do you like what I have done with the place? I am going to gut this entire department and rebuild it using modern venture capital strategies. I am going to show these boring accountants how real money is made. You are going to bankrupt a stable auditing firm within 6 months." I stated, my voice flat and emotionless. "You have zero experience in financial regulatory compliance. Buying this firm was not a visionary business move. It was a petty temper tantrum financed by my grandfather's money." Jamal slammed his feet down off the desk, his arrogant smile vanishing instantly. His face flushed with sudden intense anger. He hated being reminded of his own glaring incompetence, especially in front of my sister and my parents. He yanked open the top drawer of the mahogany desk and pulled out a thin stack of legal documents. He slammed them down onto the polished wood surface, pushing them aggressively toward the edge of the desk. "You do not get to lecture me about business anymore," Jamal spat, his voice rising in volume. "I am the chief executive officer. I sign your paychecks. And right now I am signing your termination notice. These are your standard severance and non-compete agreements. You are going to sign them right now. You are going to take your miserable $1,000 and walk out of my building." I stepped closer to the massive desk, looking down at the scattered papers. My parents stepped up behind me, standing close to witness my ultimate defeat. My mother crossed her arms, waiting for me to break down crying. They desperately wanted me to ask for my job back, to apologize for my independence. Instead, I remained perfectly still. I let the tense silence stretch out, forcing Jamal to sit uncomfortably under my freezing analytical stare. He shifted in his seat, his false confidence cracking slightly. They assumed that this targeted firing was the final nail in the coffin of my professional life. They believed that taking away my income would immediately force me to surrender to their financial control. My father let out a small sigh of relief, thinking the war was finally over. But they were entirely wrong. I was not surrendering anything today. I was actually preparing to sign away my career, but I knew something they definitely did not. I leaned forward over the massive mahogany desk, picking up the heavy brass pen that Jamal had practically thrown at me. My parents moved closer, breathing shallowly with anticipation. They wanted to witness the exact second my spirit broke. As I brought the pen down toward the signature line, my eyes darted right. Jamal had arrogantly left his primary computer monitor completely unlocked and brightly illuminated. A secondary stack of thick legal documents sat haphazardly near his elbow, displaying the bold header of a major commercial bank. I did not need to pick up the papers to understand what I was looking at. 6 years of high-level financial auditing allowed my brain to process numerical data and legal terminology faster than most people could read a simple restaurant menu. My eyes scanned the glowing screen capturing the digital summary of the hostile buyout financing. Jamal had not just used the liquid cash from my sister's trust fund to purchase this auditing firm. The trust fund alone was not nearly enough to cover the massive acquisition cost of a top-tier midtown agency. He needed institutional leverage. The screen displayed a massive commercial loan agreement with a staggering 9-figure principal balance. I traced the text down to the collateralization clause. My blood ran cold for a fraction of a second before a massive surge of pure predatory adrenaline flooded my veins. To properly secure the enormous loan, Jamal had pledged the physical assets and operating revenue of Harrison Logistics as collateral. He had legally bound the logistics company to the debt of his new venture capital firm. It was a textbook cross-collateralization strategy used by aggressive corporate raiders, but it was also a catastrophic, unmitigated disaster. Jamal fundamentally misunderstood what he actually inherited yesterday. He believed Harrison Logistics owned its warehouses, its proprietary routing software, and its vast fleet of transport vehicles. He thought he possessed the authority to leverage those assets for outside business ventures. He did not know, because he had never bothered to read the foundational corporate bylaws, that Harrison Logistics did not own a single piece of that infrastructure. The operating company leased everything directly from Harrison Holdings Management. They leased the software, they leased the land, they leased the very branding painted on the side of the trucks. And I was the sole owner and chief executive officer of that master holding company. By pledging leased intellectual property and rented physical assets to a third-party commercial bank, Jamal had committed a severe fraudulent act. More importantly, he had directly violated the ironclad covenants of the master licensing agreement established by my grandfather. That specific contract explicitly prohibited the operating company from using holding company assets as leverage for outside debt. The penalty for such a violation was not a simple fine or a legal warning. The penalty was an immediate, automatic default. My grandfather had handed Jamal enough rope to hang himself, and Jamal had eagerly tied the noose, jumping off the platform within 24 hours of receiving the money. The trap was sprung perfectly. I pressed the brass pen firmly against the paper and signed my name on the severance agreement with smooth, sweeping strokes. I did not hesitate. I did not argue. I slid the signed document back across the polished wood surface toward Jamal. He snatched it up immediately, a massive grin spreading across his face. "Look at that," Jamal sneered, holding the paper up for my parents to see. "The great independent auditor finally knows her place. You take your miserable $1,000 and you get out of my building, Stella. Maybe you can find a job balancing the cash register at a local diner." Natalie laughed, clapping her hands together. "Do not spend the whole 1,000 in one place, Stella," my sister mocked. "I hear the homeless shelters charge a premium for the good cots." My mother. Patricia sighed dramatically, adjusting her diamond necklace. "We tried to tell you for years that your choices would lead to this exact moment. You have no one to blame but your own stubbornness." I stood up straight, looking at the four of them. They were completely oblivious to the financial apocalypse hovering directly over their heads. I did not need to pack anything from my cubicle. My personal files were already backed up on a secure encrypted server. I turned my back on my family and walked out of the executive office without saying a single word. I marched down the long glass corridor, ignoring the stares of the security guards assigned to escort me. I pushed through the glass doors, stepping into the crisp morning air. Yesterday's heavy rain had cleared, leaving a sharp, bright sky. I walked half a block away, ensuring I was out of sight before pulling my phone from my pocket. I I dialed the secure number Caldwell had provided me. He answered on the first ring, his voice calm and precise. Ms. Harrison Caldwell said, "I assume the morning meeting was as unpleasant as we anticipated." "It was highly enlightening, Mr. Caldwell," I replied, keeping my pace steady as I walked down the busy sidewalk. They took the bait faster than either of us could have predicted. Jamal Cross collateralized the logistics shell to fund the hostile buyout of the auditing firm. I saw the loan agreements on his monitor. He pledged our intellectual property and physical assets to a third-party commercial bank. I could hear the subtle satisfaction in Caldwell's voice over the secure connection. A fatal breach of the master licensing agreement. He committed securities fraud and triggered the default clause simultaneously. Should I prepare the asset freeze? Prepare the injunction, I instructed, my voice cold and calculated. But do not file it with the federal judge just yet. Let them dig the hole a little deeper. I want to see exactly how much money they are willing to set on fire before we pull the rug out from under them. I spent the next 2 weeks off the grid operating out of the windowless concrete bunker at Pier 44. Caldwell had outfitted the command center with everything I needed, including a secure encrypted terminal tied directly into the global banking networks servicing Harrison Logistics. The $1,000 severance check Jamal forced me to sign sat framed on my temporary desk as a daily reminder of their ignorance. I did not need to find a new job. My new full-time occupation was dismantling my family's financial delusions piece by piece. As a forensic auditor, I possessed a very specific set of skills. I knew how to track hidden assets, expose shell companies, and unravel complex laundering schemes. Tracing the $100 million my grandfather had handed to my parents was insultingly easy. They were not attempting to hide their spending. They were actively broadcasting it to the world. Every transaction left a bright digital footprint that I meticulously logged and categorized. The sheer velocity of their financial hemorrhaging was breathtaking to witness from the shadows. My parents, Richard and Patricia, treated the inheritance cash like an endless personal ATM. Sitting in the glow of the massive digital displays, I tracked their outgoing wire transfers in real time. Within the first 72 hours, my father authorized a $12 million payment for a custom Gulfstream private jet. The purchase order explicitly stated the aircraft was for executive transport, but the flight logs showed it was immediately dispatched to the French Riviera for my mother's impromptu shopping trip. 2 days later, another wire transfer cleared for $18 million. They had purchased a sprawling oceanfront compound in Malibu, completely ignoring the fact that Harrison Logistics required massive capital reserves to maintain its aging fleet of cargo trucks. Instead of replacing the deteriorating vehicles or renegotiating union contracts, my parents were buying imported Italian marble for their third vacation home. They were severely bleeding the operating company's cash reserves dry. My grandfather had explicitly designated that money as a fiduciary test, and my parents were failing it with spectacular, catastrophic speed. I documented every single breach of their fiduciary duties, adding irrefutable evidence to my growing legal arsenal against them. Natalie was equally reckless. Her $20 million trust fund was supposed to provide lifelong financial security, but she treated it like a weekly allowance. I watched as her accounts plummeted in value. She purchased a fleet of imported sports cars, dropping $3 million on vehicles she barely knew how to drive. She chartered luxury yachts, hosted extravagant parties for high society influencers, and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on custom designer jewelry. Her social media feeds became a continuous loop of aggressive showing off. Every post was a targeted strike, an attempt to prove her superiority over the sister they had kicked to the curb. She constantly tagged Jamal in her posts, praising his visionary genius and thanking him for elevating the family brand to new heights of prestige. She had absolutely no idea that her husband was simultaneously draining her accounts to cover his own colossal failures and mounting debts behind her back. Jamal was the real cancer eating away at the core of the empire. My parents were merely negligent consumers, but Jamal was actively orchestrating massive financial fraud. I focused the advanced auditing software entirely on his newly acquired venture capital firm. The commercial loan he secured by illegally pledging my holding company's assets was sitting in a corporate account slowly gathering interest. He needed a way to justify the massive debt to the banking executives, so he fabricated a grand illusion to appease them. I tracked a series of highly suspicious wire transfers originating from the Harrison Logistics operating accounts and flowing directly into a brand new Delaware-based limited liability company. Jamal had named it Harrison Nexus AI. He funneled exactly $40 million of the operating company's remaining liquidity into this phantom entity. According to the public press releases he drafted, Harrison Nexus AI was developing a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform designed to automate global shipping routes. He promised investors that this technology would completely disrupt the international supply chain. It was a complete and utter fabrication. I dug deep into the tax filings, the vendor payments, and the payroll records for Harrison Nexus AI. The company had zero actual software engineers on staff. There was no research and development team working on algorithms. There were no patents filed with the federal government. The $40 million had been completely diverted to pay exorbitant consulting fees to offshore shell companies that Jamal secretly controlled. He was using the Phantom Artificial Intelligence project to siphon the logistics company's capital straight into his own private bank accounts. He was buying positive media coverage, paying corrupt financial journalists to write glowing profiles about his visionary leadership, and throwing lavish launch parties for a software product that literally did not exist. He even rented empty server farms just to have blinking lights in the background of his promotional videos to trick potential stakeholders. He was a textbook grifter running a high-level Ponzi scheme and using my grandfather's legacy to fund his rapidly expanding criminal enterprise. I compiled every single fraudulent transaction, every illegal wire transfer, and every breached contract clause into a massive digital dossier. I organized the data with absolute surgical precision, ensuring no defense attorney could ever dispute the raw numbers. I printed the final executive summary, a damning stack of paper detailing their complete financial ruin, and dropped it onto the metal conference table in front of Caldwell. He adjusted his glasses, reading through the staggering numbers with a cold, analytical eye. They have burned through nearly $60 million in less than 14 days. Caldwell noted, his voice carrying a mix of professional disgust and grim satisfaction. They are legally and financially exposed on every possible front. You have entirely mapped the blood flow of their corruption, Stella. The trap is fully loaded, and they are standing right in the center of it. What is our next move? I need to inspect our physical assets, I replied calmly. The time for watching from the shadows is officially over. The time for watching from the shadows is officially over. I left the bunker at Pier 44 and drove my beat-up car toward the largest distribution hub in the Harrison Logistics network. If Jamal was siphoning $40 million into his Phantom Artificial Intelligence project, the physical infrastructure of the operating company would inevitably show the devastating signs of capital starvation. A logistics empire cannot survive on fake press releases. It requires constant cash flow to maintain vehicles, pay union workers, and repair massive industrial facilities. I parked across the street from the primary loading bays, wrapping a dark coat tightly around myself to ward off the biting Seattle wind. I did not announce my arrival. I walked through the employee entrance, sliding past the distracted security guard. As the sole owner of the holding company, I possessed master access credentials that granted me unrestricted entry to every single facility bearing my grandfather's name. The interior of the massive distribution center was a scene of undeniable operational decay. The facility should have been bustling with coordinated activity, moving millions of dollars in freight. Instead, it looked like a dying beast. Half of the loading docks were completely empty. A dozen heavy transport trucks sat idle in the maintenance bay, tagged with red out-of-service stickers. I walked past a group of disgruntled mechanics who were loudly complaining about delayed paychecks and frozen supply accounts. The company credit cards used to purchase replacement parts had been declined that morning. My parents had bought a private jet and a Malibu mansion, while the essential workers, keeping their newly inherited company afloat, could not even buy new tires for the delivery fleet. The sheer magnitude of their gross negligence made my blood boil. I bypassed the warehouse floor and took the metal staircase up to the regional manager's office overlooking the facility. The office was empty, the manager likely out putting out fires caused by the sudden lack of corporate funding. I sat at the desk and logged into the local terminal using my encrypted master administrative key. I needed to see exactly how Jamal was covering up this operational disaster from the board of directors and the regional staff. It took me less than 5 minutes to bypass his sloppy security protocols and access the internal corporate communications. Jamal had sent a company-wide memo claiming the grounded trucks and delayed vendor payments were part of a strategic transition period. He promised the staff that the highly anticipated Harrison Nexus AI platform would deploy within 48 hours, instantly solving all routing inefficiencies and maximizing profit margins. He was doubling down on the lie to buy himself more time. But the most alarming discovery was an internal schedule I found hidden in his executive calendar. Jamal was not just lying to the employees. He was actively preparing to lie to the federal regulators and institutional investors. According to the calendar, he had scheduled a massive high-profile media showcase later this afternoon at a different warehouse across town. He invited tech journalists, venture capitalists, and banking executives to witness a live demonstration of the Harrison Nexus AI routing technology. He intended to use this fabricated demonstration to secure another round of high-risk commercial loans to cover the money he had already stolen. I logged out of the terminal, leaving no digital trace of my presence, and hurried back to my car. I drove straight to the secondary facility located in the trendy industrial district. When I arrived, the transformation was jarring. Unlike the decaying warehouse I just left, this facility had been scrubbed clean and heavily decorated to look like a cutting-edge Silicon Valley startup. Bright blue neon lights illuminated the exterior. Expensive catering tents lined the parking lot. A massive stage had been erected inside the main hangar, complete with enormous digital screens displaying the fake Harrison Nexus AI logo. I slipped through a side service door, blending in with the chaotic rush of catering staff and event organizers. I found a vantage point on the elevated steel catwalk above the main floor, hiding in the shadows to observe the spectacle. The doors opened and a flood of wealthy investors and eager journalists poured into the room. A few moments later, Jamal took the stage. He wore a crisp black turtleneck and a tailored blazer, desperately trying to mimic the iconic look of legendary tech founders. Natalie stood in the front row, cheering loudly, her wrists glittering with diamonds purchased by the stolen logistics funds. "Welcome to the future of global commerce," Jamal announced, his voice echoing through the expensive surround sound system. "Today, we are proud to unveil our proprietary artificial intelligence routing matrix. This technology will instantly optimize every single transport vehicle in our fleet, saving hundreds of millions in operational costs." He pointed dramatically to a row of sleek, flashing server racks positioned on the stage behind him. The screens lit up with complex scrolling code and dynamic global maps. The investors in the crowd murmured with visible excitement, snapping photos and taking furious notes. I stood on the catwalk looking down at the server racks. My trained auditor eyes immediately recognized the glaring discrepancy. The servers lacked external cooling units. They lacked the heavy-duty power conduits required to process massive amounts of live logistical data. They were nothing more than empty metal shells stuffed with cheap LED light strips purchased from a local hardware store. The complex scrolling code on the screens was merely a pre-recorded video loop running on a standard media player. The entire showcase was an incredibly expensive theatrical prop designed to defraud all these investors. He was committing wire fraud, securities fraud, and severe misrepresentation in front of a live audience. I recorded a high-resolution video capturing the unconnected cables hidden behind the curtain. My family actually thought they were invincible, building an empire of cards on a foundation of stolen money and arrogant lies. The investors were leaning in now, clearly captivated by the supposed efficiency metrics dancing across the primary screen. Jamal was riding a wave of manufactured momentum, his confidence bordering on manic. He began describing proprietary machine learning architectures that did not exist in any codebase. I watched from my perch on the catwalk with a cold, clinical fascination. He was not just lying. He was selling a ghost story to people who were blinded by the prospect of a 30% reduction in supply chain overhead. A man in a sharp charcoal suit standing near the front row raised a hand. He was a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious venture capital firms. Mr. Jamal, the investor began, his voice calm and skeptical. I represent a consortium that has been auditing your logistics operations for 3 weeks. We have seen the press releases and the theoretical projections, but we have seen zero evidence of active data integration between Harrison Nexus AI and the existing logistics fleet. Where is the live telemetry? Why are the trucks at the primary hub still using legacy manual routing dispatch? Jamal didn't blink. He didn't even pause to consider the implications of the question. That is the genius of our deployment phase, he declared smoothly. We are running the AI in shadow mode. It is currently processing all data in a parallel environment to ensure absolute stability before we push the final update to the hardware. It is a safety measure designed to protect our investors' capital from any potential system downtime. The investor looked unconvinced. Shadow mode requires external synchronization points. We have monitored your external IP traffic. There is no outgoing flow of data to any cloud infrastructure robust enough to handle the volume you are describing. I leaned over the catwalk rail, holding my phone up to record the interaction. This was the moment of truth. If Jamal doubled down now, he would be creating a verified record of fraud that could be used in a federal courtroom. I watched him sweat. A single bead of moisture formed on his hairline, despite the powerful air conditioning in the hangar. We utilize a proprietary edge computing node, he lied instantly, his voice growing slightly strained. The data is processed locally at the vehicle level to maintain a closed-loop system. It is proprietary military-grade security that even your auditors would not have the access credentials to penetrate. It was a classic grifter response. Use complex technical jargon to obfuscate the lack of substance and imply that the skeptics were simply not smart enough to understand the complexity. The mood in the room shifted. A few people started glancing at each other with furrowed brows. My mother, Patricia, looked around the room, her smile beginning to look increasingly strained and desperate. Natalie was still oblivious, filming the event on her phone, clearly waiting for the standing ovation that would cement her status as a tech visionary. I saw Dr. Gregory, the dean of the medical school, standing near the back of the room. He had been one of the primary targets for Jamal to secure secondary funding. He looked disturbed. He was a man of science, a man who valued empirical proof over flashy presentations, and he was beginning to recognize the smell of deception. I took out my laptop and tapped into the event sound system. It was linked to the central hub for the hangar. I had overridden the master controls earlier that morning during my brief reconnaissance of the building. With a few keystrokes, I isolated the main audio feed. I had the pre-recorded loop of the fake AI code already saved on my drive. I needed everyone to see the truth. I adjusted the volume levels, ensuring the audio output would override the microphones on stage. I waited for the exact moment when Jamal began to describe the projected growth for the next quarter. I hit enter. Instead of the smooth corporate jazz that had been playing throughout the reception, the hangar was filled with the harsh grinding sound of a dial-up modem connection, followed by a loud mocking error message that played on a loop through the massive concert speakers. The giant digital screens on stage flickered, went black, and then displayed a single text file. It was the source code for the AI project, or rather it was the lack thereof. It was a 5-page document filled with nothing but nonsensical placeholder text and links to a defunct cat video website. The audience froze. Jamal stopped speaking mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open like a landed fish. Natalie dropped her phone. My mother stood rooted to the spot, her hands pressed against her cheeks. The man in the charcoal suit, who had questioned the telemetry, began to laugh. It was a dry, harsh sound that cut through the silence of the hangar. You call this a proprietary routing matrix? He asked, walking up to the stage. This is a 5-page template from a free website builder. Jamal lunged for the microphone to cut the audio, but I had already looped the sound file so it would continue to play regardless of his attempts. I didn't want to hide anymore. I stood up on the catwalk and let my shadow fall across the stage. I didn't say a word. I just stood there tall and composed looking down at my family. Jamal looked up, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated terror as he realized who was in control of his technological theater. The investors were already moving toward the doors. They had seen enough. The fraud was not just alleged, it was now publicly humiliated in front of the entire city business community. This was the moment I had built for the moment. The illusion was not just torn down, but burned to the ground. I turned my back on the catastrophic scene unfolding below the catwalk and walked toward the emergency exit stairs. The hangar was a landscape of pure panic. Jamal was desperately shouting into a dead microphone, waving his arms at the fleeing investors, while my mother covered her face in absolute humiliation. I pushed through the heavy metal fire door and stepped out into the crisp Seattle night air, leaving their burning illusion behind. Caldwell was waiting in the armored sedan 3 blocks away. Exposing the fraudulent artificial intelligence project was a spectacular tactical strike, but it only stripped the fresh paint off their rotting house. I needed to personally inspect the physical foundation of the empire. 3 days later, I was out executing field reconnaissance on foot. As the legitimate chief executive officer of the master holding company, I needed to verify the physical condition of the flagship commercial real estate properties my family was supposedly managing. I deliberately chose to blend in. I wore a simple black trench coat, faded denim jeans, and comfortable flat boots. I carried no designer bags and wore absolutely no jewelry. Armed with only a plain clipboard and a digital laser measure, I spent the entire morning inspecting a prime retail complex situated right in the heart of the high-end downtown shopping district. This specific commercial property was one of the most valuable physical assets in the holding company portfolio, and Harrison Logistics was currently subleasing the ground floor spaces to several luxury boutiques. I was kneeling on the pristine pavement, carefully documenting a structural fissure near the marble entrance of an exclusive Italian boutique, when I heard the sharp, aggressive clicking of stiletto heels. The unmistakable, overpowering scent of extremely expensive perfume hit my senses a fraction of a second before the loud voices did. My mother, Patricia, and my sister, Natalie, were strutting down the wide sidewalk like conquering royalty. They were flanked by 2 visibly exhausted retail assistants who were struggling to carry towering stacks of glossy shopping bags. They were clearly on a massive spending spree, aggressively liquidating whatever remained of the operating company cash reserves before the commercial banks fully processed the humiliating collapse of Jamal and his fake technology showcase. I stood up slowly and methodically brushed the street dust off the knees of my jeans. Natalie spotted me first. Her manicured hand flew to her mouth in exaggerated shock before her expression immediately hardened into pure venomous delight. She tapped my mother's arm, pointing a diamond-ringed finger directly at me. Patricia stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes raked over my plain coat, my practical boots, and the simple clipboard clutched in my hand. Her lip curled upward in a sneer of absolute disgust. "Well, look what the stray cat dragged in," Patricia announced, her voice projecting loudly across the busy sidewalk to ensure the passing pedestrians heard her. "I knew you would hit rock bottom eventually, Stella, but I honestly did not expect you to end up wandering the luxury shopping district looking like a homeless beggar so quickly. Are you out here taking surveys for spare change?" Natalie laughed, a sharp, grating sound that echoed off the glass storefronts. "Jamal fired her so fast she probably could not even pay her rent this month," she mocked, stepping closer to inspect my plain clothing with aggressive condescension. "I told Jamal we should have given you a mop instead of a cardboard box. At least then you could have kept a job cleaning the executive bathrooms." I maintained my completely blank, analytical stare. I did not flinch. I did not offer a single word of defense. Every insult they hurled at me was simply verbal confirmation of their staggering financial ignorance. They were standing on a piece of prime commercial real estate that I literally owned, mocking me for wearing flat boots while they carried bags purchased with stolen money. You should be absolutely ashamed of yourself, Patricia continued, stepping aggressively into my personal space. Sneaking into our technology showcase 3 days ago and manipulating the audio system to embarrass Jamal in front of our vital investors was a pathetic, desperate cry for attention. Your jealousy is a disease, Stella. Jamal is a visionary, and your petty little sabotage merely delayed our inevitable global expansion. We already secured alternative offshore funding to bypass those narrow-minded local banks. I noted the critical piece of financial intelligence she just foolishly handed me. Alternative offshore funding meant Jamal was taking on unregulated high-interest debt. He was accelerating the death spiral of Harrison Logistics. We are hosting a massive event this weekend, Natalie added, proudly flipping her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. It is the Harrison New Era Appreciation Gala. We rented out the grand ballroom at the most expensive hotel in the city to celebrate our upcoming global expansion and to reassure our new international partners. The guest list is strictly elite billionaires, politicians, and actual industry leaders. Patricia stepped back, motioning for the exhausted retail workers to continue walking. I am only telling you this because I know how you love to skulk around in the shadows and spy on our success, she said, delivering her final blow. Do not even think about showing your face at the hotel this weekend, Stella. Security has explicit orders to arrest you for trespassing if you come anywhere near the venue. We are done allowing a bitter, unemployed failure to drag down the prestige of our family name. Go find a soup kitchen and leave the corporate world to the people who actually know how to run an empire. I watched them strut away, their towering stacks of shopping bags swaying with every arrogant step. I pulled my cell phone from my trench coat pocket and dialed Caldwell's secure line. He answered immediately. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, keeping my eyes on my mother and sister as they disappeared into another luxury boutique. "I just received some excellent operational intelligence. Jamal is seeking unregulated offshore debt to cover the fallout from the hangar disaster. And my family is throwing a massive gala this weekend at the Grand Ballroom to celebrate their delusions." Caldwell let out a low, appreciative hum over the encrypted connection. A highly publicized gala filled with elite stakeholders and international creditors. That sounds like the perfect venue for a definitive corporate restructuring. It is the perfect trap, I replied, turning back to inspect the marble facade of my building. Prepare the federal injunctions, Mr. Caldwell. We are going to a party. The following morning, the heavy steel doors of the Pier 44 bunker remained sealed shut against the outside world. I sat in the center of the command room, surrounded by the glowing monitors that tracked every single frantic financial move my family was making. Jamal was moving fast, desperately trying to plug the massive holes in his sinking ship. The unregulated offshore debt my mother had so proudly bragged about was already appearing on the hidden ledgers. He had secured a $50 million bridge loan from a shadowy syndicate based in the Cayman Islands at a predatory 20% interest rate. He was using the last remaining shreds of Harrison Logistics' operating credibility to secure the cash. As I cataloged the disastrous loan terms, a loud chime echoed through the bunker. The secure delivery chute near the primary entrance indicated a package had arrived. Caldwell walked over and retrieved a sleek black cardboard box tied with an obnoxious gold ribbon. He carried it to the conference table and set it down in front of me. The return address printed on the pristine white label was the executive suite of Harrison Logistics. I pulled the ribbon loose and removed the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of cheap tissue paper, was a standard-issue black-and-white waitress uniform, complete with a polyester apron and a generic plastic name tag that read Stella. Resting on top of the folded uniform was a heavy cardstock envelope sealed with a wax stamp of the newly fabricated Harrison Nexus AI logo. I broke the wax seal and unfolded the thick stationery. The letter was typed, but the arrogant signature at the bottom unmistakably belonged to Jamal. I read the words aloud, allowing Caldwell to hear the sheer magnitude of their delusion. "Dear Stella Jamal," wrote his condescending tone practically leaping off the page. "We understand that losing your modest little auditing job Must have been financially devastating for someone of your limited means, since your apartment building is currently undergoing massive upscale renovations, and you will be out on the street very soon. We decided to extend a charitable hand. The Harrison New Era Appreciation Gala takes place tomorrow night at the Grand Hotel. We are expecting over 500 elite guests, and the catering company is severely understaffed. Put on this uniform and arrive at the service entrance by 4:00 sharp. I will personally ensure you are paid triple the standard minimum wage plus tips. After all, family always takes care of its own. Do not try to enter through the front doors. Caldwell let out a sharp, dry laugh, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. He looked down at the cheap polyester fabric and then back up at the glowing financial monitors displaying the multi-million-dollar offshore debts Jamal was drowning in. It is truly a marvel to witness, Caldwell noted, his voice laced with surgical precision. They are currently insolvent, bleeding millions of dollars a day, and taking on toxic debt from unregulated criminal syndicates. Yet they still prioritize spending company funds to courier a theatrical insult to the person who holds the deed to their entire empire. I did not throw the uniform away. I carefully folded the cheap fabric and placed it back into the sleek black box. I set the box gently on the corner of the metal conference table, treating it not as an insult, but as the ultimate physical evidence of their staggering, blinding arrogance. They wanted me to serve them champagne while they danced on the deck of a sinking ship. They wanted to parade me in front of their wealthy new friends as a broken, defeated servant to stroke their fragile egos. I am keeping this, I stated, smoothing my hand over the lid of the box. When the federal authorities inevitably ask us to demonstrate the severe, gross negligence of the current operating management, this letter will serve as a beautiful exhibit. It perfectly illustrates their complete lack of fiduciary focus. I stood up from the conference table and walked over to the secure locker I had installed in the corner of the bunker. I swung the metal door open. I was not going to wear a cheap polyester apron tomorrow night. I reached inside and pulled out the garment bag containing my absolute best tailored power suit. It was a flawless, razor-sharp midnight blue two-piece suit constructed from imported Italian wool. It was the armor of a woman who commanded respect through pure competence and unyielding authority. I hung the suit carefully on the edge of the locker door, running my fingers along the crisp lapel. As I admired the sharp cut of the fabric, a sudden high-pitched electronic chime pierced the quiet hum of the server racks. It was not the delivery chute. It was the primary encrypted terminal. Caldwell stepped up to the monitor, his eyes scanning the incoming encrypted transmission. He straightened his posture, the atmosphere in the bunker shifting instantly from calculated preparation to imminent execution. The message carried the official digital seal of the Federal District Court. The presiding federal judge just reviewed the mountain of financial evidence we submitted last night. Caldwell announced, his voice thrumming with dangerous energy. He reviewed the cross-collateralization documents, the fraudulent artificial intelligence showcase footage, and the highly toxic offshore loan agreements. The judge recognized the immediate catastrophic threat to the holding company assets. Caldwell tapped the screen, maximizing the legal document for me to read. The digital signature of the federal judge glowed brightly at the bottom of the final page. It was an emergency injunction order. It legally authorized the immediate total freezing of all Harrison Logistics operating accounts. Furthermore, it officially invalidated the fraudulent collateral Jamal had pledged to the banks. I stared at the federal seal, feeling a rush of absolute freezing power wash over me. The weapon was fully loaded, and the safety was off. The trap my grandfather designed had snapped shut with bone-crushing force. Jamal, my sister, and my parents were now legally paralyzed. They just did not know it yet. "Print 3 official copies of that injunction, Mr. Caldwell," I ordered, my voice echoing off the concrete walls of the bunker. "Put them in red leather folders, the kind they use for VIP guests." Caldwell smiled, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "And what exactly is our timeline for serving these documents to the current operating executives, Ms. Harrison?" I looked at the cheap waitress uniform sitting in the box, and then at my midnight blue power suit hanging on the locker door. "The gala starts at exactly 8:00 tomorrow evening," I said, grabbing my suit. "It is time to go to the party." The Grand Hotel was a towering monument to old money and excessive luxury situated in the wealthiest district of Seattle. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open the doors of imported sports cars and stretched limousines. The Harrison New Era Appreciation Gala had completely taken over the entire ground floor. Flashing cameras from local society reporters illuminated the red carpet rolled out across the sweeping marble steps. Jamal had clearly spared absolutely no expense using the stolen logistics funds to manufacture an illusion of untouchable corporate prestige. I did not walk toward the dimly lit service alley tucked behind the loading docks where Jamal had commanded me to go. I bypassed the delivery entrance entirely. I stepped out of the armored black sedan directly in front of the main lobby doors. I wore the midnight blue tailored power suit, stepping onto the red carpet with the absolute freezing confidence of a woman who owned the ground she walked on. Caldwell walked smoothly at my right side, carrying the 3 red leather folders containing the federal injunctions. Flanking us on either side were 2 massive private security contractors. They were highly trained former federal agents dressed in immaculate dark suits with discreet earpieces curled behind their ears. We did not look like guests attending a celebration. We looked like an executive strike team preparing to execute a hostile corporate takeover. The guest list attendant standing behind a velvet rope at the entrance tried to step in my way, holding up a gold-plated clipboard. She opened her mouth to ask for my invitation, but one of my security agents simply stepped forward and leveled a cold, silent stare at her. She immediately lowered the clipboard and stepped aside, allowing us to pass without a single word of protest. We marched through the soaring glass doors and entered the spectacular main lobby. The grand ballroom was visible at the end of the long corridor. The heavy gilded doors were pushed wide open, spilling golden light and the sound of a live string quartet out into the hallway. Waiters carrying silver trays of crystal champagne flutes glided effortlessly through a crowd of hundreds. The room was packed with the exact kind of elite stakeholders my mother had bragged about. I recognized prominent politicians, aggressive venture capitalists, and senior banking executives mingling under the massive crystal chandeliers. They were all drinking expensive champagne, completely oblivious to the fact that the host of the party was drowning in toxic offshore debt. I paused just outside the ballroom entrance, letting my eyes sweep across the crowded floor. I spotted my family almost immediately. They were holding court near the center stage, basking in the manufactured adoration of their guests. Natalie wore a blindingly expensive silver gown, laughing loudly while holding onto Jamal's arm. Jamal was busy shaking hands with a group of older investors pointing toward the stage, where the fake artificial intelligence presentation was scheduled to take place. My mother, Patricia, fluttered between socialites, making sure every photographer captured her best angle. Then I saw my father. Richard Harrison was standing near the grand entrance holding a glass of bourbon and talking to a prominent local judge. He turned his head casually, scanning the arriving guests to ensure the door staff was maintaining the strict exclusivity of the event. His eyes swept past me for a fraction of a second before snapping violently back. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like he had just seen a ghost manifest in the middle of a high society gala. He excused himself from the judge with a frantic, disjointed gesture and practically sprinted across the polished marble floor toward me. His face contorted with a mixture of absolute confusion and boiling, aggressive rage. He looked at my tailored power suit, my professional security detail, and the imposing figure of Caldwell standing silently at my side. This was not the broken, defeated waitress they had so eagerly anticipated mocking tonight. "What in the world do you think you are doing, Stella?" my father hissed, lowering his voice to a harsh, aggressive whisper to avoid drawing the attention of the nearby guests. "I explicitly told your mother to inform security to arrest you if you came anywhere near the front doors. You were supposed to use the service entrance in the back. Where is your uniform? Who are these men standing with you? Get out of here before I have you physically thrown onto the street and locked in a police cruiser." I did not break my stride. I stepped directly into his personal space, forcing him to take a highly uncomfortable step backward to avoid colliding with my security agents. I looked him dead in the eye, maintaining my perfectly blank, analytical stare. I was not the terrified daughter he had evicted from her apartment. I was the executioner of his fake empire. I am not here to serve you cheap champagne or fetch appetizers for your wealthy friends, Richard. Stated my voice, carrying a freezing metallic edge that cut straight through the ambient noise of the string quartet. I am not here to play the pathetic failure in your twisted little family narrative. You have spent the last 3 weeks treating my grandfather's legacy like a personal piggy bank while actively destroying the operational foundation of the company. You invited all these powerful people here tonight to celebrate your financial genius. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, pushing him further back toward the open ballroom doors. He stumbled awkwardly, trying to maintain his balance and his fragile dignity in front of the wealthy guests. The time for hiding behind toxic offshore bank accounts and fake press releases is officially over. I continued my tone, dropping to a dangerously quiet register designed to terrify him. I told you I would eventually come to collect exactly what you owe. I came to collect the rent, Father, and your lease has just expired permanently tonight. My father stared with sudden panic. He tried masking with aggressive bluster. He scanned the lobby for hotel security. He snapped his fingers, summoning 2 men in hotel uniforms. Remove this woman immediately, my father commanded, pointing a finger. She is not on the official guest list. She is a disgruntled former employee trying to extort us. The guards stepped forward to grab my arms. Before they crossed the threshold, my security agents moved with blinding speed. My agents stepped in front, blocking the guards, and placed their hands on the batons concealed beneath their jackets. They stayed silent. The sheer professionalism radiating from my detail made the guards freeze, holding their hands up and stepping back. You cannot throw the landlord out of the building tonight, Richard Caldwell said, stepping smoothly into the space. He opened his briefcase and retrieved the first red leather folder. He held it out toward my father with a neutral expression. Consider this your formal notice of eviction. My father looked at the red folder like a venomous snake. He refused to take it. What is this garbage, he spat, trying to maintain his facade. Some fake lawsuit printed off the internet. My corporate lawyers will laugh you out of the city. They will not laugh when they read the federal seal. Caldwell replied smoothly, opening the folder himself and holding the document up. This is a federal injunction signed by the presiding judge of the United States District Court. It authorizes the immediate freezing of all assets tied to the Harrison Logistics operating shell. That includes the corporate accounts you have been using as a personal piggy bank for the last 3 weeks. My father's eyes darted across the thick legal text and the digital seal. I watched the blood drain from his face. His confident posture collapsed completely. Furthermore, Caldwell continued, turning the page. The injunction freezes the $18 million Malibu compound you purchased. Since you used misappropriated funds to buy that property, it is subject to asset forfeiture. Your private jet has been grounded on the tarmac at the regional airport. The pilot was served notice an hour ago. You have zero access to corporate liquidity. Your credit cards are dead. You cannot even afford to pay the catering staff serving those crab cakes inside. My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had stepped off a cliff, waiting for gravity to pull him down. The grim reality of his absolute financial ruin was paralyzing him right at the entrance of his own victory party. What is going on out here? A sharp, shrill voice demanded. I looked past my frozen father to see my mother, Patricia, marching toward us. Natalie was trailing right behind her, holding a glass of champagne. They pushed through the heavy gilded doors, oblivious to the standoff that just occurred. Patricia stopped next to my father, her eyes narrowing as she looked me up and down. I specifically told you to use the service entrance. Stella, my mother hissed, entirely missing the context of the situation. Where is the uniform Jamal sent you? If you think you can show up here and beg for your old job, you are sorely mistaken. We are hosting global stakeholders tonight. Get out of my sight before you humiliate the family name. You already humiliated the family name, Patricia? I stated, my voice loud enough to cut through the music spilling from the ballroom. I do not need to beg for a job from a man currently borrowing $50 million from a Cayman Islands criminal syndicate just to pay the catering bill tonight. My mother blinked, her arrogant sneer faltering. What are you talking about? Jamal secured institutional funding. He is a visionary. Jamal is a grifter, I corrected sharply, stepping closer to her. He cross-collateralized assets he does not own. He pledged the logistics fleet and warehouses to secure illegal offshore debt because traditional commercial banks cut him off after he tried leveraging stolen property. Natalie stepped forward, her champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass. Stop lying, Stella. My sister slurred, clearly intoxicated by expensive alcohol and her own manufactured prestige. Jamal owns the company. He bought your auditing firm just to fire you. We have $100 million in the bank. You had $100 million, I corrected her, maintaining my analytical calm. You spent $60 million of it in 2 weeks on sports cars, yachts, and fake technology presentations. The remaining $40 million is locked inside a frozen corporate account you can no longer access. You are standing in a rented ballroom drinking champagne you cannot afford to pay for, celebrating an empire you never actually owned. Jamal suddenly emerged from the bustling crowd inside. He was sweating heavily despite the aggressive air conditioning. He noticed my family gathered at the entrance and marched over, pushing past a group of startled investors. He looked at my security detail and glared directly at me. I thought I told security to keep the trash out of my gala, Jamal shouted, pointing a finger at my face. You have 3 seconds to turn around and run away before I ruin you permanently. I looked at Jamal, smiling a cold, ruthless smile, making him hesitate. You cannot ruin the person who holds the deed to the building, Jamal, I said, stepping past my paralyzed father and terrified mother. I motioned for my security team to move forward. They parted the crowd, clearing a wide path directly into the grand ballroom. I ignored Jamal's aggressive posturing and walked straight past him onto the polished hardwood floor. The time for whispering at the front door was over. I locked my eyes onto the brightly lit stage at the center of the massive room. It was time to show his wealthy investors and his corporate creditors exactly who was really running the Harrison empire today. I walked down the center of the grand ballroom, my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor with the rhythm of a ticking clock. The sea of wealthy investors, prominent politicians, and elite socialites parted instinctively before me. They did not know who I was, but they recognized absolute power when it walked into a room. My security detail flanked me, moving with predatory grace, while Caldwell matched my stride perfectly, holding the red leather folders like execution warrants. The live string quartet faltered, hitting a discordant note before fading into total silence. A heavy, palpable tension settled over the massive room. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as heads turned, tracking my progress toward the brightly lit stage. Jamal had already rushed ahead, scrambling up the carpeted steps to the podium. He adjusted his velvet jacket, his hands trembling slightly as he grabbed the microphone. He was desperate to seize control of the narrative before I could reach the platform. He signaled wildly to the audio-visual technicians in the back of the room to start the presentation. The massive digital screens behind him flared to life, projecting the fraudulent Harrison Nexus AI logo in brilliant sapphire blue. Welcome, esteemed guests and visionary partners, Jamal announced, his voice artificially amplified, but carrying a distinct tremor of panic. Tonight, we celebrate the dawn of a new era for Harrison Logistics. We are here to unveil a technological marvel that will disrupt the entire global supply chain. He tried to project the charisma of a legendary tech founder, but he just looked like a terrified man standing on a trapdoor. I finally reached the bottom of the stage steps. 2 hotel security guards moved to block my path, but my agent stepped forward instantly. They did not raise their voices or draw weapons. They simply utilized their sheer physical mass and federal training to smoothly pivot the guards aside, pinning them gently but immovably against the edge of the stage. I climbed the carpeted stairs without breaking my gaze from Jamal's face. Jamal gripped the edges of the wooden podium, his knuckles turning white. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an uninvited guest attempting to disrupt our celebration, Jamal stammered, trying to force a laugh that echoed hollowly across the silent ballroom. Security will handle this minor inconvenience. Please direct your attention to the screens behind me. Nobody looked at the screens. Every single eye in the room was locked completely on me. I crossed the stage, stopping exactly 2 feet away from Jamal. He was sweating profusely, the moisture glistening on his forehead under the harsh stage lights. He smelled of expensive cologne and sheer terror. I did not yell. I did not make a scene. I simply extended my right hand toward the microphone he was clutching like a lifeline. "Hand it over, Jamal." I stated, my voice low, cold, and carrying an unmistakable threat of violence. "You are completely out of your depth, and your investors are waiting to hear a keynote speech." He hesitated, his eyes darting frantically toward my parents, who were standing near the front row, looking absolutely paralyzed. "Do not do this, Stella," Jamal hissed, leaning in close so the microphone would not pick up his voice. "I will give you whatever you want. I will write you a check right now. Just walk off this stage. You cannot write a check from a frozen corporate account, Jamal," I replied smoothly. "Now give me the microphone before I have my security detail physically pry it from your fingers in front of every major banking executive in Seattle." His shoulders slumped. The arrogant facade he had maintained for years finally shattered. He slowly relinquished his grip, handing me the microphone with trembling fingers. He stepped back, shrinking into the shadow of the podium. I stepped up to the center of the stage, facing the sea of bewildered elite guests. The stunned silence in the ballroom was absolute. I looked out over the crowd, making direct eye contact with the venture capitalists, the politicians, and the media representatives who had been promised a technological revolution. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting clearly and commanding absolute authority across the massive space. "My name is Stella Harrison. Many of you know my father, Richard, or my brother-in-law, Jamal, who just vacated this podium. They invited you here tonight to celebrate the rapid expansion of Harrison Logistics and to solicit your financial backing for a groundbreaking artificial intelligence platform." I paused, letting the weight of my introduction settle over the room. I watched my mother, Patricia, cover her face with her hands in the front row. Natalie stood next to her, completely frozen. "However, I am not here tonight as a supportive family member." I continued, pacing slowly across the stage to command the visual space. "I am here in my official capacity as the sole owner and chief executive officer of Harrison Holdings Management." I heard a sharp collective gasp from the senior banking executives in the room. They understood the terrifying implications of a holding company stepping out from the shadows during an operating company gala. "You have been pitched a magnificent story tonight," I stated, gesturing toward the glowing screens displaying the fake corporate logos behind me. "You have been promised exponential growth and unparalleled operational efficiency. But as a financial auditor, I prefer raw data over compelling narratives. And the data indicates that you are currently standing inside a burning building." I turned to look directly at Jamal, who was sweating profusely in the corner of the stage. "The executives currently managing Harrison Logistics have brought you here under entirely false pretenses. They simply do not possess the legal authority to offer you any equity, and they certainly do not possess the technology they are claiming to sell. It is my absolute fiduciary duty to formally inform every single one of you that everything you have been told tonight is a catastrophic lie." I let my statement hang in the dead silence of the ballroom. The air was absolutely thick with shock. I could feel the collective realization dawning on the hundreds of powerful people staring back at me. This wasn't a standard family dispute. This was a hostile corporate execution unfolding live on stage. I turned my attention back to the massive digital screens behind me. I raised my hand, signaling the audio-visual technicians in the back of the room. I had already bypassed their primary control deck, sending them my encrypted presentation files earlier that afternoon. They were waiting for my cue. "Please direct your attention to the screens behind me," I announced, my voice resonating with cold, analytical precision. "I am about to project the official unredacted corporate bylaws and the primary trust distribution documents executed by Theodore Harrison 3 years ago." The massive screens flickered, changing from the blue logo of the fraudulent artificial intelligence project to high-resolution scans of complex legal documents. The federal court seals and the aggressive watermark of the Harrison Master Holding Company were clearly visible on every single page. The documents were intentionally blown up massive enough for every banking executive in the room to read the fine print. These documents established the Harrison Holdings Management Corporation, I explained, pointing toward the screen. As you can see from the shareholder registry, I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of this entity. What you need to understand is exactly what this holding company controls. I signaled the technicians again. The screen shifted to a detailed color-coded corporate structure diagram identical to the one Caldwell had shown me in the bunker. It clearly illustrated the brutal reality of the empire. Harrison Logistics, the company my parents and my sister inherited yesterday, is nothing more than an empty operating shell. I continued, ensuring my voice carried to the furthest corners of the grand ballroom. Harrison Logistics does not own a single warehouse. They do not own the massive fleet of delivery trucks. They do not own the proprietary routing software. And they certainly do not own the branding painted on the side of those vehicles. A low murmur of disbelief rumbled through the crowd of investors. I watched a senior partner from a major venture capital firm pull out his phone, frantically typing a message, likely to his risk assessment team. Every single one of those assets, the real estate, the patents, the software, algorithms, and the physical infrastructure, is owned completely and exclusively by my holding company. I stated, my voice rising slightly to cut through the growing noise in the room. Harrison Logistics merely leases those assets from me. They are required to pay a massive licensing fee every single quarter simply to keep the lights on and the trucks moving. If I choose to revoke those licenses tonight, Harrison Logistics ceases to exist by tomorrow morning. My mother Patricia stumbled forward from the front row, her face drained of all color. Her expensive designer gown seemed to hang loosely on her suddenly trembling frame. "You are lying!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. "Your grandfather left the company to us. We have the documents. We have the voting shares. You have 50% of the voting shares for an empty shell corporation, Patricia." I corrected her, my tone dripping with icy contempt. "You own a massive pile of public liabilities and a crippling payroll obligation. You own the debt. I own the foundation." Natalie pushed past my mother, her hands balled into tight fists. Her silver sequined dress glittered under the harsh stage lights, but her arrogant facade was completely shattered. "This is illegal!" Natalie screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You forged these documents. Jamal is a venture capitalist. He knows how to structure a business. He would have known if we didn't own the assets." I turned my gaze toward Jamal, who was still shrinking into the shadows near the podium. "Jamal is a grifter, Natalie," I said loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "He is a glorified con artist who didn't even bother to read the foundational corporate bylaws before he started spending your trust fund on sports cars and private jets. He assumed that because the company had the Harrison name on the door, he possessed the authority to leverage it." I signaled the technicians for the final time. The screen behind me shifted, displaying a complex financial ledger. It was the exact ledger I had discovered on Jamal's unlocked computer monitor during my hostile termination. The numbers were massive, highlighted in bright glaring red. "This brings me to this critical issue of the evening," I announced, projecting my voice to command the increasingly chaotic room. In order to finance his hostile buyout of my auditing firm and to fund this pathetic artificial intelligence charade, Jamal required massive institutional leverage. I pointed directly at the glaring red numbers on the massive screen. To secure a 9-figure commercial loan from a third-party bank, Jamal illegally pledged the physical assets and the operating revenue of Harrison Logistics as collateral. He literally tried to mortgage assets he did not own. The gasps from the banking executives in the crowd were audible. They understood the catastrophic legal implications of what I had just revealed. Pledging leased intellectual property as collateral for outside debt was a colossal act of fraud. The master licensing agreement explicitly prohibits the operating company from using holding company assets as leverage for outside debt. I explained, my voice ringing with absolute finality. By pledging my property to secure his personal loans, Jamal committed a severe fraudulent act. Furthermore, he directly violated the ironclad covenants of the licensing agreement, triggering an immediate automatic default. I turned to face Jamal, my expression completely devoid of mercy. You triggered the poison pill, Jamal, I stated, watching his eyes widen in pure terror. The moment you signed that loan agreement, you authorized the holding company to seize all remaining assets of Harrison Logistics to cover the licensing debts. You didn't build an empire. You handed me the keys to destroy yours. The shockwaves rippling through the grand ballroom were almost visible as the gravity of my statement settled over the crowd. The high-profile investors and elite stakeholders who had come to celebrate a technological revolution were now staring at a monumental financial disaster. Jamal had effectively bet the entire logistics empire on a fraudulent AI project using assets he didn't own as collateral. The poison pill had been triggered, and the holding company I controlled was now legally authorized to seize whatever remained of Harrison Logistics. Jamal's face turned an ashen gray. He staggered back from the podium, his arrogant facade completely obliterated. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life's work vanish in a cloud of smoke. My parents, Richard and Patricia, were paralyzed in the front row, their expressions shifting from disbelief to abject terror. Natalie, clutching her champagne glass, seemed to shrink under the weight of the collective scrutiny. "You can't do this," my father managed to say, his voice trembling as he stepped toward the stage. "We're your family, Stella. You can't just destroy everything." "You destroyed it yourselves," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. "You squandered $100 million in cash on yachts, mansions, and sports cars. You allowed Jamal to siphon $40 million into offshore shell companies for a phantom project. You violated the fiduciary trust placed in you, and you breached the master licensing agreement." I gestured toward Caldwell, who stood stoically at the edge of the stage holding the red leather folders. "The federal injunction is already in place. Your corporate accounts are frozen. The collateral you pledged has been invalidated. Harrison Logistics is effectively bankrupt, and the holding company will begin seizing all operational assets immediately." The investors in the crowd erupted into a cacophony of panicked conversations. Phones were whipped out, aggressive directives were shouted into receivers, and the elite stakeholders who had been eager to invest just an hour ago were now scrambling to mitigate their exposure. The realization that they had almost been defrauded by a meticulously crafted illusion sent shockwaves through the financial elite. Jamal, desperate to salvage his crumbling empire, launched himself toward me, his hands outstretched. "You ruined everything!" he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I'll kill you for this!" Before he could even cross half the distance, my security agents moved with lethal precision. They intercepted Jamal, grabbing him by the shoulders and expertly forcing him to the floor. They didn't strike him, but they pinned him down with the absolute, unyielding force of highly trained professionals. Jamal struggled, his velvet suit twisting awkwardly as he shouted incomprehensible threats, but the agents held him securely, neutralizing the threat. The commotion on the stage only amplified the panic in the ballroom. My mother wailed a high-pitched sound of pure despair as she realized the extent of their ruin. Natalie dropped her champagne glass, the crystal shattering against the polished hardwood floor, and sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. My father stood frozen, his eyes wide with a horrific comprehension of the consequences they now faced. Then the piercing sound of police sirens cut through the chaos. The wailing grew louder, echoing off the towering buildings outside the Grand Hotel. Red and blue lights flashed through the massive windows of the ballroom, painting the frantic crowd in strobing colors. The heavy gilded doors burst open, and a squad of heavily armed police officers and federal agents flooded into the room. The lead agent, a tall, imposing figure with a badge pinned to his tactical vest, strode purposefully down the center aisle, flanked by his team. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide path for the authorities. The agent stopped at the base of the stage, his eyes scanning the scene. "Richard Harrison, Jamal Vance," the agent announced, his voice booming across the stunned silence of the ballroom. "You are both under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent." The words struck like physical blows. My father slumped his shoulders, bowing under the weight of his impending incarceration. The security agents hauled Jamal to his feet, handing him over to the federal authorities. He was quickly handcuffed, his wrists bound tightly behind his back. The arrogant venture capitalist was now a common criminal, his carefully constructed persona stripped away. The police also approached my mother and Natalie, informing them that they were persons of interest in the ongoing investigation regarding the misappropriation of funds. They weren't arrested on the spot, but the implications were clear. Their lavish lifestyles were over, and they would be facing intense legal scrutiny. I stood on the stage looking down at my family as they were humiliated and dismantled in front of the very people they had sought to impress. The elite society they craved had witnessed their spectacular downfall. The Harrison name, once synonymous with logistics dominance, was now inextricably linked to fraud and deceit. I didn't feel a surge of vindictive pleasure. I didn't feel the need to gloat or revel in their misery. I simply felt a profound sense of closure. The decades of emotional abuse, the constant belittling, the targeted evictions, it was all over. The toxic cycle had been broken not by forgiveness, but by cold, hard accountability. I turned to Caldwell, who stood quietly beside me. He gave a subtle nod of approval. We had executed my grandfather's final test with surgical precision. The operating shell was destroyed, but the holding company, the true foundation of the empire, was safe and entirely under my control. I stepped off the stage, my security agents falling into step behind me. The crowd of investors and socialites parted once more, their eyes tracking my every movement. I didn't look back at my family as they were led away by the authorities. I walked out of the Grand Hotel, the flashing police lights reflecting in the puddles on the slick pavement. The rain had stopped and the air felt clean and crisp. I was ready to build something real. I walked out of the Grand Hotel, the flashing police lights reflecting in the puddles on the slick pavement. The rain had stopped and the air felt clean and crisp. I was ready to build something real. Caldwell held the door of the armored sedan open for me. I slid into the leather seat, the heavy door closing and instantly muting the chaotic wail of sirens outside. My security agents filed into the trailing SUV. We pulled away from the curb, leaving the shattered remains of my family's fabricated empire in the rearview mirror. The federal authorities moved faster than anticipated, Caldwell noted, pouring a small glass of sparkling water and handing it to me. The sheer volume of wire fraud Jamal committed triggered immediate red flags at the Securities and Exchange Commission. He forced their hand when he tried to leverage the offshore debt, I replied, taking a slow sip. You do not cross-collateralize leased intellectual property and then publicly broadcast it to a room full of venture capitalists. It was corporate suicide served on a silver platter. The district judge signed the sweeping asset freeze 30 minutes before we entered the ballroom. Caldwell added his fingers, flying across his silver tablet. Every single corporate and personal account tied to Harrison Logistics, Jamal, Richard, and Patricia is currently being locked down by federal banking regulators. It is a total financial eclipse. We returned to the brutalist bunker at Pier 44. The massive steel doors sealed behind us, securing us inside the command center. The wall of digital monitors had shifted from tracking Jamal's frantic spending to displaying a series of stark, flashing federal notices. I took my seat at the head of the metal conference table, logging into my encrypted terminal. I wanted to witness the exact moment their ill-gotten wealth evaporated. As a financial auditor, I had frozen assets before, but never on this massive global scale. At precisely midnight, the banking algorithms executed the federal judge's orders. I watched the live feeds as the $100 million my grandfather had left them, the cash they had recklessly squandered, and moved across various holding accounts, was officially seized by the government pending a full criminal investigation. The $18 million Malibu compound was instantly flagged for asset forfeiture. The newly purchased private jet, still sitting on the tarmac, was locked down by aviation authorities. Jamal's offshore syndicate, accounts the ones holding the toxic $50 million bridge loan, through massive error codes. The Cayman Islands bankers were undoubtedly panicking, realizing their collateral was entirely fraudulent and totally inaccessible. Jamal had stolen from highly dangerous people, and now he had absolutely no way to pay them back. What about the union workers and the warehouse staff? I asked, my eyes scanning the payroll ledgers. My family destroyed the executive branch, but the blue-collar workers keeping the supply chain moving did nothing wrong. I will not let them lose their homes because my father wanted to play billionaire. Anticipated and handled, Caldwell said smoothly. As the Chief Executive Officer of Harrison Holdings Management, you have the authority to establish a direct emergency payroll subsidiary. We bypass the Harrison Logistics operating shell entirely. The truck drivers, the warehouse operators, and the administrative staff will receive their direct deposits at 6 o'clock this morning. They are working for you now. I nodded, satisfied. The foundation was secure. The working class of the empire was protected, while the parasitic executive class was being methodically eradicated. By sunrise, the financial earthquake had completely leveled their lives. My encrypted terminal began intercepting the frantic automated alerts triggered by my family's personal bank accounts. It was a digital symphony of catastrophic failure. My mother, Patricia, had fled the Grand Hotel during the police raid, attempting to check into a 5-star presidential suite across town to hide from the media fallout. The system flagged her transaction immediately. I watched the alert pop up on my screen. Her exclusive black credit card was declined at the reception desk. She tried a second card. Declined. She tried a third. Declined. The federal asset freeze did not discriminate. It stripped her of her purchasing power, instantly leaving her stranded in a hotel lobby at 2 in the morning with no cash, no credit, and no home to return to since the primary estate was also heavily implicated in Jamal's extensive fraud. Natalie's situation was even more pathetic. Her $20 million trust fund, which she had treated like an endless personal piggy bank, was completely drained. Jamal had quietly siphoned the remaining balance to float his fake artificial intelligence project right before the gala. Whatever meager pennies remained were instantly frozen by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Natalie had spent her entire adult life relying on unearned wealth to bully and belittle everyone around her. Without her trust fund, she was absolutely nothing. The morning news cycle was vicious. The local and national financial networks ran wall-to-wall coverage of the Harrison Logistics collapse. Footage of Jamal being shoved into the back of a federal transport vehicle played on a continuous loop. My father, Richard, was photographed walking out of the hotel in handcuffs, using his suit jacket to hide his face from the blinding flashes of the paparazzi cameras. The mighty Harrison family, who had spent decades looking down on the working class, were now the lead story on every major crime broadcast. I sat back in my leather chair, watching the news feed with cold detachment. I had audited their entire existence, identified the critical liabilities, and balanced the ledger. They had called my inheritance a joke. They had laughed at my yellow envelope. But my grandfather had given me the ultimate weapon, the absolute legal authority to tear down their glass house. The initial phase of the asset forfeiture is complete, Caldwell announced, placing a fresh stack of legal documents on my desk. The federal agents are currently raiding the Harrison Logistics corporate headquarters. They are seizing every hard drive, every financial record, and every piece of paper your father and Jamal ever touched. It is a total operational wipeout. Good, I replied, picking up my platinum pen. Let the feds sift through the ashes. We have a new empire to build, and I want a completely clean slate. The news coverage of the Harrison Logistics collapse saturated the airwaves for 48 straight hours. Every local and national outlet ran segments dissecting the spectacular failure of Jamal's Phantom AI project and the subsequent federal raid on the corporate headquarters. It was a complete media circus. I watched the coverage from the quiet sanctuary of the bunker. Caldwell had ordered lunch from an upscale deli, and we ate sandwiches while analyzing the immediate fallout. The operating shell is effectively gutted, Caldwell said, taking a bite of his pastrami. The feds seized everything they could get their hands on, the physical assets, the servers, the files. They are building a massive case against Jamal and your father. And the holding company? I asked, wiping my mouth with a napkin. Untouched. Caldwell confirmed, a rare smile playing on his lips. Your grandfather designed the corporate structure specifically to insulate the holding company from the operating shell's liabilities. The federal judge recognized the distinction immediately. Harrison Holdings management is clean, solvent, and entirely under your control. I nodded, satisfied. The foundation was secure. The parasitic executives had been excised and the core assets were protected. It was a brutal but necessary surgery. Now it was time to rebuild. The next morning, I moved my operations from the bunker to the top-floor executive suite of the primary Harrison Holdings building downtown. It was a massive glass-walled office with panoramic views of the Seattle skyline. I hadn't been in this office since I was a teenager, and walking into it now as the sole owner of the empire felt surreal. I spent the first few hours meeting with the emergency transition team Caldwell had assembled. We were working frantically to stabilize the logistics network and ensure the union workers and warehouse staff were paid and protected. It was a chaotic process, but we were making progress. Around noon, my assistant buzzed me on the intercom. "Ms. Harrison, there is a Natalie Vance here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, and she's quite insistent." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. I had anticipated this visit. "Send her in," I said, leaning back in my chair. The heavy glass doors swung open and Natalie practically stumbled into the office. The transformation was startling. The arrogant, sequin-clad socialite who had mocked me at the gala was gone. In her place stood a terrified, exhausted woman wearing a wrinkled trench coat and oversized sunglasses that failed to hide the dark circles under her red-rimmed eyes. "Stella!" Natalie gasped, rushing toward the desk. "Thank God you're here, you have to help me." I didn't stand up. I didn't offer her a seat. I just looked at her, my expression blank and analytical. "Help you with what, Natalie?" She stopped in front of the desk, wringing her hands nervously. "Everything is gone," she sobbed, the tears flowing freely now. "Jamal's accounts are frozen. My trust fund is empty. The bank just served me with foreclosure papers on the Hamptons estate because Jamal used it as collateral for some offshore loan. I have nothing, Stella. Absolutely nothing." "You had $20 million and a multi-million-dollar estate 3 weeks ago," I pointed out, my voice flat. "You spent it on sports cars, yachts, and funding your husband's criminal enterprise. What did you expect would happen?" "I didn't know," Natalie cried, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I didn't know he was stealing from the company. I didn't know the AI project was fake. He told me he was a visionary. He told me we were going to be billionaires." "Ignorance isn't an excuse, Natalie," I said coldly. "You eagerly participated in the lifestyle his fraud afforded you. You proudly wore the diamonds he bought with stolen money. You laughed when he publicly fired me. You didn't care where the money came from as long as it kept flowing." Natalie collapsed into one of the leather guest chairs, burying her face in her hands. "I'm ruined, Stella. The media is hounding me. The feds want to question me. Jamal left me with $40 million in debt to offshore syndicates. They're threatening me. Please, I need money to hire a lawyer. I need a place to stay. You're my sister. You have to help me." I watched her cry, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no sympathy, no sisterly obligation. She had spent her entire life trying to tear me down, trying to make me feel small so she could feel big. Now she was begging me to save her from the consequences of her own arrogance. "I don't have to do anything," I stated, my voice echoing in the large office. "You aren't my responsibility. You made your choices and now you have to live with them." Natalie looked up, her face streaked with mascara. "You can't be this cruel," she whispered. "You have billions of dollars. You own the entire company. A few million to save your sister is nothing to you." "It's not about the money," I replied. "It's about accountability. You want me to bail you out so you can go back to pretending you're better than everyone else. That's not going to happen." I opened a drawer in my desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the polished mahogany surface toward her. "What is this?" Natalie asked, sniffing and wiping her nose with a tissue. "It's an employment contract," I said. "Harrison Holdings Management is taking over the physical maintenance of all logistics facilities. We are currently hiring entry-level janitorial staff. The starting pay is minimum wage and the hours are brutal. It involves cleaning warehouse bathrooms, scrubbing loading docks, and emptying trash bins starting at 6 o'clock every morning." Natalie stared at the contract like it was a live grenade. The color drained from her face. "You want me to be a janitor?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief and rising anger. "I'm a Harrison. I don't scrub toilets." "You aren't a Harrison anymore," I corrected her sharply. You're $40 million in debt and you are currently unemployed. You came here begging for help. This is the only help I am offering. She looked at the paper, then at me. Her expression hardened, a flash of her old arrogance breaking through the desperation. I won't do it. It's humiliating. You're just trying to punish me. I am offering you an honest day's pay for an honest day's work, I said calmly. Something you have never experienced in your entire life. If you want to survive, you need to learn how the real world operates. This is your opportunity to start over from the very bottom. Natalie glared at me, her chest heaving with indignation. She didn't say another word. She stood up abruptly, turned on her heel, and stormed out of the office, the heavy glass doors slamming shut behind her. I watched her leave, feeling a profound sense of closure. She had chosen her pride over survival. She would rather face the criminal syndicates and the federal investigators than lower herself to honest labor. That was her choice. I had offered her a lifeline and she had rejected it because it wasn't wrapped in gold. I picked up the janitorial contract and dropped it into the shredder next to my desk. The machine hummed, turning the document into confetti. The past was dead and I was finally free to focus on the future. The machine hummed, turning the document into confetti. The past was dead, and I was finally free to focus on the future. Toxic families rarely leave quietly. They cling to the host, desperately attempting to drain the last remaining drops of blood before they are forcefully removed. My parents, Richard and Patricia, were no exception to this rule. Less than 24 hours after Natalie stormed out of my office, Caldwell stepped into the executive suite with a grim expression. The security desk in the main lobby just notified me. Caldwell stated, "Your parents are currently downstairs demanding to see you. They claim it is a matter of absolute life and death regarding the family bloodline." I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers. They had spent their entire lives treating me like a disposable asset, and now that they were entirely bankrupt, they suddenly remembered we shared DNA. "Send them up," I instructed, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Let us finish this properly." Caldwell nodded and tapped his earpiece, relaying the order to the lobby guards. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling Seattle skyline. This was not going to be a negotiation. This was a termination. The heavy glass doors of my office slid open, revealing my parents. They looked absolutely ruined. The bespoke designer suits and arrogant posture were completely gone. My father wore a wrinkled blazer that hung loosely on his shrinking frame. My mother carried a mid-tier handbag, looking frantic and exhausted without her personal stylists. They stepped into the massive office, staring at the polished mahogany and the panoramic views with a mix of awe and bitter resentment. This was the empire they thought they owned. Stella, my mother, began rushing forward with her arms outstretched, as if preparing to pull me into a loving maternal embrace. "Thank goodness you are here. It has been an absolute nightmare. The federal agents seized our bank accounts. They locked us out of the Malibu house. We had to sleep in a cheap motel last night." I raised a single hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Do not take another step toward me, Patricia," I warned, my tone freezing the air between us. "You are not here for a family reunion. You are here because your credit cards declined, and you are terrified of facing the real world." My father stepped in front of her, attempting to salvage his fractured pride. "Stella, you have to stop this madness," Richard demanded, though his voice lacked its usual booming authority. "We are your parents. We gave you life. You cannot just leave us on the street to be devoured by the media and the federal investigators. We need access to a stipend, just a modest allowance from the holding company to secure legal defense and temporary housing. We are blood. Family protects family." I stared at him, letting his hypocritical words hang in the silent office. "Family protects family," I repeated slowly, tasting the bitter irony. "That is a fascinating philosophy, Richard. Let us examine exactly how you protected your family when you held all the power." I walked back to my desk and picked up a sleek, black digital recorder. I had kept the audio file from the day of the will reading securely backed up for this exact moment. I pressed a button and linked the device to the surround sound system in my executive office. I want you to listen very closely to yourselves, I stated. I hit play. The crisp, high-fidelity audio filled the room. The recording captured the exact moment Jamal threw the $100 bill at me. Then my mother's voice echoed through the office, dripping with venomous disdain. Your grandfather finally woke up and realized you were a lost cause, she sneered on the recording. 33 unmarried auditing other people's money because you were too arrogant to work for the family business. Then my father's voice played sharp and cruel. I just instructed my personal wealth manager to buy out the residential complex where you currently rent your apartment. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. I stopped the playback. The silence in the office was deafening. My parents stood frozen, staring at the speakers as their own vile cruelty echoed back at them. You actively hunted down my landlord, bought my building, and tried to make me homeless within a single day just to demonstrate your power. You celebrated my eviction like a corporate victory. My mother covered her face, weeping genuine tears of absolute shame. We were angry, she sobbed. We were grieving your grandfather. It was just words, Stella. Please, you cannot hold that against us forever. We are still your mother and father. You ceased being my parents a long time ago. I replied, my voice perfectly steady. A family is not a biological accident used as a human ATM machine. You threw me away when you thought you had $100 million. You only came crawling back because you are broke and facing federal prison. I picked up 2 thick red folders from my desk and handed them to Caldwell. He stepped forward and presented one to each of my parents. Those are permanent, legally binding no-contact orders, I explained. They have already been signed by a federal judge. If you attempt to call me, email me, approach my residence, or enter any building owned by Harrison Holdings Management, you will be arrested instantly. You are completely erasing us, Richard whispered. You already erased yourselves. Richard, I corrected him coldly. I am simply finalizing the paperwork. I turned to Caldwell. Please escort these 2 individuals out of my building. They are permanently banned from the premises. Caldwell gestured toward the massive security agents waiting by the doors. My parents did not argue. They had absolutely nothing left to bargain with. I watched them walk away forever. The lobby guards moved swiftly, stepping forward to execute the federal order. My parents realized in that terrifying instant that they had absolutely zero leverage left. They had no money. They had no home. They had no power. And they had no daughter. They turned and walked toward the glass doors, their heads bowed in absolute defeat. I stood by the windows watching them walk out onto the rainy Seattle street, a fitting echo of my own eviction just weeks earlier. Caldwell stood quietly by the door, waiting until they were entirely out of sight before speaking. Well, Miss Harrison, Caldwell said, his voice carrying a deep, resonant satisfaction. The infection has been completely removed. The holding company is secure. The operating shell is being restructured under federal oversight, and the criminal elements are facing immediate prosecution. Your grandfather's stress test was executed flawlessly. What are your operational directives for the rest of the quarter? I turned away from the window, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The view was breathtaking, but it was not the view that mattered. It was the foundation. The logistics empire my grandfather built was not just a collection of trucks and warehouses. It was a massive living machine that employed thousands of hardworking people. My parents and Jamal had nearly destroyed that machine to fuel their own pathetic vanity. They treated the company like a personal piggy bank, completely ignoring the massive responsibility that comes with operating an international supply chain. My first directive, Mr. Caldwell, I began walking back to my desk, is to officially establish the Harrison Logistics Employee Continuity Fund. We are going to take $10 million from the holding company cash reserves and allocate it directly to the union pension funds and the employee healthcare initiatives. I want the drivers, the warehouse operators, and the maintenance crews to understand that the new management values their labor above executive bonuses. They kept this company running, while my family was busy buying private jets and luxury estates. Now we are going to ensure they are properly compensated. Caldwell nodded, typing the directive into his tablet. An excellent strategic move. It stabilizes the workforce and immediately establishes profound operational loyalty. And what about the auditing firm Jamal purchased? The one you were fired from? I sat down in my leather executive chair, opening a fresh file on my secure terminal. That firm possesses highly valuable market data and an excellent roster of mid-level analysts who were terrorized by my brother-in-law, I replied. We are going to initiate a formal corporate buyback. We will purchase the firm back from the federal receivership handling Jamal's bankrupt assets. We will acquire it for pennies on the dollar, clean out the cowardly senior partners who allowed Jamal to run rampant, and restructure it as our internal corporate auditing division. I want absolute transparency across every single subsidiary we own. It was a beautiful strategy. I was not just reclaiming the empire, I was actively rebuilding it using the very tools my family had tried to destroy me with. 6 months later, the dust had completely settled. The federal trials concluded with devastating speed. Jamal was convicted of massive securities fraud, wire fraud, and gross embezzlement. The federal judge showed absolutely no leniency, sentencing him to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. The offshore criminal syndicates he borrowed money from attempted to recover their funds, but the federal asset freezes made it impossible. Jamal lost everything, and he was going to spend the next decade and a half locked in a small concrete cell, completely stripped of his velvet suits and arrogant delusions. My father, Richard, managed to avoid direct prison time by cooperating extensively with the federal prosecutors, detailing exactly how Jamal had orchestrated the fake artificial intelligence showcase. However, he was permanently barred from serving as an executive officer for any publicly traded company, and he was forced to declare total personal bankruptcy. He and my mother, Patricia, were currently renting a small 2-bedroom apartment in a distinctly unglamorous suburb. They had been completely excommunicated from the elite society circles they loved so desperately. Without their wealth, they were nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered about at high-end cocktail parties. Natalie, the golden child who had mocked my flat boots and my auditing career, was forced to learn a very hard lesson about reality. With her trust fund decimated and her husband in federal prison, she had absolutely no choice but to enter the workforce. She was currently employed as a junior administrative assistant at a mid-tier logistics competitor, ironically filing the exact same type of expense reports she used to mock me for handling. I stood in my glass-walled office reviewing the latest quarterly profit margins for Harrison Holdings Management. The numbers were exceptional. The Employee Continuity Fund had stabilized the workforce, resulting in a massive increase in operational efficiency. The Integrated Auditing Division had identified and eliminated millions of dollars in corporate waste left over from my parents' negligent reign. The empire was not just surviving, it was thriving under ethical, analytical leadership. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was an email from the foundation I had established earlier that month. I set up the Theodore Harrison Scholarship Fund, utilizing a portion of the holding company profits to provide full-ride university scholarships to students pursuing degrees in financial auditing and forensic accounting. The email contained the final list of the first 20 recipients. These were brilliant, hardworking students who did not come from wealthy trust funds or elite pedigrees. They were students who understood the value of reading a ledger. I signed the authorization document officially funding their education. My grandfather had left me a complex, brutal test. He knew my family would try to destroy me for the inheritance. He knew they would flaunt their wealth and mock my independence. But he also knew that in a game of corporate survival, the person who actually understands the numbers will always defeat the person who only knows how to spend them. They called my inheritance a joke. They laughed at my yellow envelope. They thought they had won the war before it even started. But they forgot the most important rule of the empire. You never cross the auditor. Because the auditor always holds the detonator. In the unfolding drama of Stella's corporate succession, the most profound lesson is that true power and security reside in substance and competence, not in the superficial performance of wealth. Stella's family was entirely blinded by their own arrogance, mistaking a sudden cash inheritance and hollow corporate titles for absolute control. They focused their energy on buying private jets, flaunting designer clothes, and throwing lavish galas, fundamentally ignoring the mechanical realities of the empire they claimed to rule. They built a fragile house of cards on leased ground. Conversely, Stella possessed genuine, hard-earned expertise. As a financial auditor, she understood that flashy presentations and unearned status are ultimately meaningless without structural integrity. Her grandfather recognized this vital truth, entrusting the actual core of his legacy, the master holding company, and the intellectual property, to the only person who respected the grueling work required to maintain it. Stella's meticulous patience allowed her toxic family to orchestrate their own spectacular downfall simply through their own ignorance, greed, and financial illiteracy. She did not need to yell or match their cruelty. She only needed to let the math do the talking. This narrative strongly reminds us that no amount of performative success can protect you if you do not understand the foundation upon which you stand. True empowerment comes from knowing your own worth and mastering your craft, rendering the superficial judgments of others completely powerless against your reality. When faced with manipulative or toxic environments, the absolute strongest defense is never to match their chaotic energy, but to silently fortify your own independence and expertise. Take a moment today to examine the foundations of your own life and commit to building your success on genuine knowledge rather than relying on the fragile illusions of status.